How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylei Hobby Time, a genre that overlaps heavily with this hobby that I've been doing for the past couple years, but one that I've never done is Gundam. I've used a few parts for kit bashing purposes, but never completed a full Gunpla kit until now. I've had quite a few comments requesting Gundam dioramas, and every time I pass these kits in the store, I've been tempted to buy them. I finally gave in, and I have to say I had a lot of fun with this one. I broke the figures out of their boxes, and after admiring this power pose of how to properly fire a bazooka, I began assembly. Ever since I was little, I've had a slight allergic reaction to instructions, and I am very much a proponent of not following the instructions if you are kit bashing, but because I wanted this to look like the thing on the box, I did follow the instructions. I've assembled a lot of the 1:12 scale Star Wars figures made by Bandai, and a lot of the joints and mechanics are exactly the same, so assembling this kit was very familiar to me. Before starting this project, I went on YouTube to see what other Gundam dioramas had been made, so as not to recreate something that somebody had already done, which I suppose is impossible on the internet, because after I was done, I went over to Pinterest and I saw this. I was bummed when I realized my idea was not as novel as I thought it was, but at least I equipped the Zaku with a bazooka instead of the Heat Hawks. Next, I assembled the RX-78-2. This kit went together just as easily as the first one, and it was just as fun to build. After assembling the Gundam, I equipped him with a beam saber and, probably more importantly, his shield. You'll see why in a moment. I thought it would look fun to have the Zaku flying through the air with his bazooka like Master Chief from Halo, firing point blank at the Gundam, hence the importance of the shield. After that, it was time to work on the base. I had a leftover piece of 1/4-inch plywood made into a little box, and I sanded the unsightly edges, and then I marked and drilled a hole in the center for a little toggle switch. After that, it was time to build up the terrain. I got a few pieces of XPS insulation foam, and I found a few pieces that had the right height. I trimmed those down off camera on my hot wire table, and I glued 2 of them together. And I got out some pre-made plaster rocks to create the cliff face. I had to do a little bit of cutting and trimming to get all the pieces to fit right, but after a little bit of puzzle solving, I was able to glue them all in place, have a nice little rock surface for my cliff. Next, it was time for the terrain paste. I mixed up some plaster, Mod Podge, water, and Sculptamold this time. I'm giving the Sculptamold a try. Has a nice texture, but definitely cures faster than my usual mix. So there are some pros and cons. After the base was covered, I sprinkled on some rocks, sand, and finer sand. And then I glued it all down with isopropyl alcohol and watered down glue. The isopropyl alcohol breaks down the surface tension and allows the glue to spread out a lot better. After that, I set the base aside to dry, and I moved back to the mobile suits. I took them outside and I gave them a coat of matte varnish. This would allow paint to stick to them better than it would to the plastic surface. I coated each of the suits with a wash. I used Nuln Oil on the Gundam and Agrax Earthshade on the Zaku. After they had been covered, it was time to pull off some of the paint to complete the effect. I dipped some Q-tips in isopropyl alcohol and I swabbed away the paint, leaving just the cracks, recesses, and hard-to-reach areas with the full strength of the wash. This helps add contrast and a weathered look to the suits. After that, I did some edge highlighting, dry brushing, and sponging on of a metallic silver paint, helping to sell the idea that these are giant suits made of metal, and not tiny plastic figures. I gave the bazooka and the shield the same treatment, and I added a UV resin lens to the viewfinder on the bazooka. After that, the figures were done. By this time, the base had dried, so I took it outside and I primed it. I gave the base a medley of ink washes, including yellow-brown, rust brown, green brown, and of course some brown brown. I finished it up by spraying on some tan, and then I drilled some holes through the base to anchor some standoffs for the figures. The holes I drilled in the base were just the right size to pressure fit the standoffs in place, and a hammer helped persuade the standoffs to get into their positions. I also glued a small section of metal pipe just wider than the standoffs behind the leg of each suit. This will fit snugly over the standoff and help hold it in position better. Once the standoffs were both in place, I sealed them with some foam-safe superglue as an added level of stability, and then it was time to figure out the lights. I started with a light that would be coming out of the bazooka and hopefully look like a muzzle flash from a bazooka. I soldered some very fine wires to the filament and I passed them through the length of the bazooka and out behind where the Zaku's shoulder will be. I also cut up the thrusters from the jetpack and I drilled some holes to accommodate two blue filaments, which will hopefully look like the flames that propelled the suit forward. After those were in place, I put the bazooka back on the shoulder of the Zaku and I repeated the process of the jetpack thrusters on the Gundam. The RX-78 also has a beam saber, which is not to be confused with a lightsaber, but I did make it the same way, so if you're curious how I made that, go ahead and watch any of my videos with a thumbnail that has a lightsaber in it. After I had added a battery pack, I ran the wires from the figures down through the standoffs, and I connected all of the wiring under the base. I then used a piece of styrene tube to make the projectile being shot from the bazooka, and I glued it in place. I then painted it, and I added some UV resin around the base of the saber to mimic how I saw it in the reference photos. To finish up the fire effects on those light up elements, I grabbed some cotton and I began wrapping it around the filaments to create a muzzle flash and a bullet trail. I added some smoke coming from the exhaust of the bazooka as well as a smoke cluster coming from the thrusters. I then airbrushed some fiery orange into the center of the muzzle flash and I painted the outermost sections of all of the rest of the smoke with black. After that, the next thing to do was to paint the sides of the diorama with black 3.0, and I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.